I've now been an emeritus professor of communication for about 12 years, maybe a little longer. And if you take the 5 years that I spent during that time as a lead facilitator for the International Listening Association's Certified Listening Professional Program, I've probably been doing research in listening and teaching courses in listening for over 45 years. So one of the things I'd like to share with you, my students and I developed a way of thinking about how you would prepare if you're going to listen to someone and you know it's going to be difficult and you know you've got a little bit of time to get ready. So what I'd like to do today is to share those principles with you and at the same time share a story that's from my own personal experience that will try to illustrate how you might use those principles. So let me start by giving you an idea of why this was going to be difficult for me. So I was raised in a small Methodist church in Ohio, and our high school teachers were the Sunday school teachers when we were in junior high school and high school. And they spent a lot of time teaching us about international religions and that kind of thing. Well, my father was a superintendent of schools, and so he was a very John Dewey enthusiast and believed that students should have experience with a large range of ideas and so forth, and that they would come to a belief or a way of thinking about things that was good for them. In that experience, I began to shift a little bit, and this is important because my father didn't quite have John Dewey's idea perfectly, because he believed that if the students did that, they'd come to the right decision. And so it's important to keep that in mind, because as I went off to college and took philosophy courses and so forth, that began to be even more important as I began to shift in terms of my belief system. By the time I was beginning my sophomore year in college, I was attending a Universalist church, Unitarian Universalists, and those folks tend to be agnostics, which essentially means that they continue to think and think and think and continue to study about their ideas. Well, I'm not sure exactly how it occurred, but my father found out that I was doing that, and he decided he'd made a mistake, that I did not accept Christ as my personal Savior, and therefore that was a real goof on his part. By that time, my next oldest brother was also out of the house. So there were 4 siblings that were left. They got raised very differently, and they grew up very much in the mold of my dad's belief system. So that's one thing, because it produced a lot of tension between us as we went home and had family meetings and that kind of stuff. So the next thing that occurs is that I lived out in Utah and became interested in the anti-nuclear movement and went down to Las Vegas to participate in the protests. And my dad found out about that too. Well, he was very much in favor of having the nuclears around because he thought that they were protecting us and that kind of thing. So there was also some tension there. Next event, I got a divorce. And when you have a divorce and that kind of thing, you begin to have these feelings of needing to reconnect. So I was having the feeling of needing to reconnect with my family. And I thought that one of the things that should happen for me is that I should go home and try to listen very carefully to my father and his ideas, and that would give him a chance to believe that I was going to let him be who he was. So I bought a ticket, gave myself 2 months' time to prepare. And so what I want to share with you are the principles that my students and I developed, and share just a little hint or two about what I did with each one. So the first one is to meditate on the feelings that you have about the person that you want to listen to. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how much this person meant to me, the feelings I had about him, those kinds of things. And the second thing that we suggested that you do is to remember positive events about this person. Well, one that sticks out in my mind, I had spent the summer away from home just before I went to college to work. And so I came home for like a week to get ready and went off to school. So I decided about, I don't know, a month and a half into the school year that I wanted to come home and say hi to folks, that kind of thing. So I got home, talked to my mom a little bit. My dad wasn't there. And it turns out that he was across the street because across the street was the school building that he worked in. And behind the school building that he worked in was a football field, and he was monitoring the gates to the football field. So I walked across the street, go up a little bit of a rise, and I start down the hill. And here comes my dad with his hands stretched right out at me and shook my hand. And you know, I felt like I became an adult that day. It was a real cool experience. So the next thing that we tried to get people to think about was to actually plan so that you could have full energy for this experience. And so what I did, since I had 2 months to work with, is I went on a very careful diet. I made sure that I got plenty of rest and that kind of thing. And I actually lost a little bit of weight, which was a nice kind of thing. The next thing that we ask, and this one's really important, is to meditate on your willingness to let this person be different from you. And of course, that takes a little bit of work because that's the rub where we had been in terms of these two particular important issues to him. The next principle was let your curiosity develop. And I found myself getting pretty curious about what he was going to say. The next idea is to let yourself look for reasons behind that person's experiences and beliefs that leads them to those kinds of things. That took a little bit of thinking. I ended up speculating on what those might be. It turns out I wasn't 100% accurate as I did that, which is probably going to be the case for most of us, but it opens your mind a little bit to looking for those kinds of things. My first book that I wrote about listening focused on the idea that if you had listened well, you will be surprised by something that this person says. And I found myself wanting deeply to have that surprise happen. The other thing that you really got to keep in mind here is that you've got to remember that the way your system is built in terms of how you listen and that kind of thing is working against you in relation to something like this. Because most of the time we're going to interpret things in very much the way we have always interpreted them. And so you're going to have to be very careful about what you decide the meaning is that this person is sending to you. So I flew home, and it took a little while to get my dad off someplace where I could actually attempt to listen to him and so forth. But I got him talking about the nuclear issue. And of course he started out with the things that you would expect him to talk about how they protected us and how they kept the Russians from sending their own nukes and that kind of thing. But as I didn't challenge him and I just let him talk about that, he started to shift to a different way of talking about it. He started talking about what was important to him in terms of what he was trying to protect. And the first thing he says is, I'm trying to take care of your mother. Well, I'm certainly interested in taking care of my mother. And then he says that he wanted to take care of my siblings. Well, I want to take care of my siblings. And then he says he wanted to take care of his grandchildren. Well, now he's got me. That's my kids. And so we now had a place where we're in complete agreement. And we began to talk about how we were afraid and what our fears were and that kind of stuff. And it began to be something where we were really on the same wavelength, talking about it in the same kinds of things. An interesting thing happened. He started talking about his religion, and he hadn't talked about his religion with me in a long, long time. He's talking about his faith, and I let it be there. And then something incredibly fantastic happened. he shared with me two very private, very personal experiences, which as I listened to those, I could clearly see why he believed what he believed. Well, the next few years, being home was a lot easier. Wasn't so hard. And that was a nice relief to have. But I don't want you to think that it's a panacea. I don't want you to think that it's something that solves everything. And I'll share one last experience with you to give you a sense of why I think that's true. On his deathbed, close to the end, my father spent some time, it was hard for him, but he tried to talk to each one of my siblings. I spent time holding his hand and sitting beside his bed several times. He didn't say one word to me. He hadn't changed his mind about what was important. And I guess he left it at that. Thank you very much.